Okay, let's give it a go. So, look into the camera and talk, right? It's been quite a while since I've recorded one of these, so I kind of need to get back in the groove. Not that I was in the groove very well to begin with, because I didn't do that many episodes. But I'm going to try. I'm going to just sit here in front of the camera and talk. And I guess one of the things I should talk about is why it's been so long. Now, when I started this, I said that I was not going to be political. I said this is, going to be uh, sort of just about inspiration and motivation and talking to interesting people, and I thought that was a good idea at the time. But since I started this whole project, we've gotten a new president, and our whole country's kind of gone wild. And in fact, right now, we're at war, which seems bizarre because we have a president who ran on being anti-war and not going to start any wars and America first and a lot of catchphrases like that. But we're at war. The last year has just been crazy. And I was thinking about it today, and I was actually on a little bit of a run, and I was thinking part of the reason I've struggled so much with restarting the podcast has been the concept of overcome by events. So back in the late 80s, early 90s, I first heard this term, overcome by events. And it was in the context of the fall of the Soviet Union. And basically, the way I heard it was in regards to maps. And when the Soviet Union fell, within a couple of years, we had the Soviet Union, and then we also had a couple of revolutions shortly thereafter. And within a couple of years, all our maps of Europe were pretty much obsolete, or at least of Eastern Europe. And so the term, as I heard it, was the maps had become overcome by events. And I think that's kind of apropos for a lot of what we got going on today, because every time you try and form an opinion these days, it becomes overcome by events. There's so much going on so quickly. The velocity of change and just bananas activity in our nation right now and in our world right now is insane. Like, you try and form an opinion, you try and get a stance on something, and it becomes overcome by events. And then you have to reset, and that's what I understand. That's by design. They're flooding the zone is the term that they've been using. And the idea is if they overwhelm you with so much stuff, you can't react to everything. And so they're trying to slip certain things through and basically advance an agenda, which is clearly what's happening. So anyway, back to the podcast. I said it wasn't going to be political. However, since then, that opinion has become overcome by events. I feel like we cannot be unreactive in this time. And I have so many acquaintances, friends, former friends, who are kind of taking the stance of don't be political. Don't be political in this moment. They're like, don't make this political. And it's like, well, unfortunately, politics is affecting our lives more quickly, deeply, and severely than it ever has in my lifetime. Like, this is just insane. And there, I'm sure there's a certain amount of naivety. I just wasn't paying attention. I wasn't paying attention to a lot of stuff. But the last year has really kind of woken me up to the fact that we need to pay attention. We need to be a more attentive. We need to react more. And we need to let people know where we truly stand. Because one of the things I've found since Donald Trump became president is a lot of the people who I considered friends, acquaintances, somewhere in there, but I liked them. And a lot of them I thought were strongly in favor of liberty. And that was a big thing. And especially working working in the gun industry and being in the military, people are like liberty this, liberty that, freedom this, freedom that. I thought they were serious. I thought they really meant what they were saying. And in fact, I think it seems that a lot of people say stuff like that when they're talking about themselves or their friends, but they're not really doing what I think the Constitution does, which is applying it to everybody in the U.S. Everybody in this land deserves to be free. Everybody in this land deserves freedoms. Everybody in this land deserves the protections of the U.S. Constitution. And a lot of my constitutionalist or libertarian friends suddenly are fine abdicating or abridging liberties and freedom if it's people that aren't the same as them. And that's been very eye-opening. It's also been pretty shocking and a little hard to sort of deal with, a little hard to come to terms with. And I've lost a ton of friends over it, even including family, which I think is pretty common. And I'm sure some people look at me and say, wow, he certainly got radical, because I kind of became activated politically to my friends and in social media, because I just think, like, we can't let this stand. We can't just let things happen, because that's what happened in 1930s Germany. And a lot of people get upset when you draw that parallel. Oh, this wasn't like 1930s Germany. But every day it seems a little bit more like 1930s Germany in terms of the things the government's doing and the things the public is willing to put up with. And so I think what this podcast is going to become, at least in the near term, is going to be me sort of spilling my thoughts to the camera. And we'll see how that goes. We'll see if anybody downloads it, listens to it, watches it on YouTube. We'll see what happens. But I can't have it otherwise. I can't do the I'm not going to be political thing. And I know a lot of people, and I'm sympathetic to some of my friends who are, for instance, in the gun industry or in the military. And so they really can't be political. They don't have as much leeway, because it can affect their job, it can affect their income, and that's a hard decision. And it could, you could easily say you have to make the hard choices. That's not really for me to tell them. And like I said, I'm sympathetic. I understand. Like, you can't always just come on strong and come out, at 100 miles an hour with really opinions that go against people around you or your customer base or whatever. So I get that. However, I'm not in a position where that's a requirement. I'm no longer in the military. I'm no longer working in the gun industry. So I'm not relying on, like, fitting in to that in order for my well-being or my living. And I do think a lot about the time we're living in and the fact that I have a teenage daughter, and someday she might ask me, Dad, why didn't you do enough? Why didn't you stand up when it was important? And why didn't you stand up for women and girls? And why didn't you stand up for marginalized communities? And I really want to have good answers for that. It would crush me to say, well, just cause, or because that's not, not the world I was functioning in, or what. I don't even know exactly what kind of excuse you might give, but I don't have to give an excuse, and so I won't give an excuse, and so I'm holding myself accountable for that day. I think it's super important in this moment that we stand up for the weak, we stand up for the marginalized, we stand up for the non-citizens, we stand up for girls, we stand up for women. There's just so many different things that should not fall by the wayside and go against our values, or our purported values as Americans. The things we talk a big game about, and then all of a sudden everything's negotiable. and there's a whole lot of disinformation, and so maybe this podcast can also be a way to counter some of that, because I know a lot of that disinformation is spreading on the internet. It's spreading through social media. It's spreading through podcasts. So maybe if I can put a tiny bit of weight on the other end of the scale, then that'll affect change in a positive way. I don't know, but I feel like I cannot act any other way. I can't pretend that everything's fine. I can't pretend to support our president, who's clearly just an awful person. Just the worst. And I've never supported him. I've never voted for Trump. I did serve under him briefly when I was in the military. That's not really a choice thing, and I never worried about that because that's, how the military works. But I never voted for him. I never thought he was a good person. I never made excuses. But now more than ever, I think it's patently obvious that he's a horrible, horrible person. Probably raped children. Definitely a criminal. Definitely lies all the time. Just lies constantly. And it looks like he's suffering from dementia. And so I think in this moment we need people to voice a different opinion. We can't say, "Oh, I'm going to support America first," if that means supporting his administration and his craziness. I think the idea that it's unpatriotic not to support our country right now, and to be clear, I do support our country. Like, I'm very patriotic. I very much believe in our country. I believe in the structure that the founding fathers built and that others have built on through the last 250 years. I passionately believe that it's a great society and a great model. I just think we're going through a rough patch, and we don't need to pretend. I don't think supporting the troops is supporting the war in Iran. I don't think that ignoring the bad things our president does is in any way positive. And I don't think that applies to any president. I don't think, anybody gets a pass, and so I think what I'm going to do is still trying to focus on inspiration and focus on positivity, and also stay in my lane in terms of what I actually know and, where my knowledge, experience, expertise actually is. I think I'll try to stay in that area. I'm not going to try and become a political pundit. I'm not going to try and, become something that I'm not qualified to be in terms of the podcast world. But yeah, this podcast is going to be a little bit political. There's just no getting around that. And hopefully over time, folks will find it and come along for the ride and maybe find some inspiration or some comfort, and we'll see where it all goes. So I want to thank anyone that's watching this. I only laugh because it's been so long since it's basically been a year since I've recorded one, and even then I think I had like 4 followers. So I'm gonna try and do this more often. I'm just gonna do what I'm doing right now, sit in front of the camera and talk, and if I can find a guest, I'll bring a guest and make them sit in front of the camera and talk. And in the meantime, if you have anything you want me to talk about, let me know. Send me you can message me. There's a ton of ways through the podcast sphere on YouTube. You can do it in comments. You can send me direct messages, emails, messages through the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. There's a way to make comments or send messages. So let me know what you want to talk about, and I'll let you know if that works for me. I may go back to, because I talked about doing one on bullying, and I think that's a super important topic right now. I'm just not sure how to quite broach that, or not really broach it, but how to approach it. Originally I had this whole thing how I was going to talk about that I did a talk on bullying for a kids camp a few years ago, and it went really well, and really it came from a place of me being bullied as a child. I was bullied severely growing up, and I actually view that as a positive because it made me a stronger person. I'm not sure that works that well for anybody, and I don't recommend it, but I was just going to talk about that, and then also I've been trying to think of how to relate that to what's going on right now, because I see a lot of bullying going on in the media, in the public spaces, in social media, especially regarding politics. I see a lot of people trying to bully other people to their point of view, or just to silence or compliance. We watched our president and vice president bully Vladimir Zelensky about a year ago, and that was just like utterly ridiculous and embarrassing to watch, because the way they were treating a world leader, and also in retrospect, as he was talking about dealing with war, and he said, we would know one day, and they blew him off and yelled at him and asked him why he wasn't wearing a suit. But in fact, right now, we are dealing with war, and in fact, the U.S. has gone to Ukraine for anti-drone technology that they have developed. So it's a little bit of a funny turn. So anyway, I may revisit that and do a whole podcast about it. But that's it's just I think the biggest thing is I've just been kind of struggling with how to get started, and so today I'm just getting started. And we'll see where it goes. We'll see what I talk about. We'll see if I get more guests. And I'll just keep doing this and move forward. So, thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your patience. And look forward to more.